Greetings and welcome back to the Contrarians. Tonight we are doing a Patreon suggested panel on the topic of our favorite instrumental music. Now that's a really big subject, so I'm excited to see exactly what our panelists are bringing for a perspective on that general topic. We're going to start tonight with Mr. Pontus Norshammer. Pontus, tell us about your three favorite instrumental pieces, please.
Well, actually, I put up a load of records because I didn't understand. I didn't understand it was three of them. But let's start with one of my old war horses, Frank Zappa, and I always loved King Kong. This is from the Uncle Meat album. It's the studio version. There's a live snippet on there as well, but this is a side-long track. It was released in 1969. Every sort of band he had played a version of King Kong. The infamous Fire at Montreux casino, which led to Smoke on the Water, the fire occurs during a King Kong, which is a jazz piece, which is lots of improvisations. It could last over an hour or half an hour. There's a version in Paris that's 45 minutes, and he could really jam with solos. He could really let the band grow and groove to it. And there's a beautiful version from 1967 recorded in Sweden where he has Swedish radio because someone is manipulating the radio transmitter so you can hear the Swedish news suddenly, which is quite interesting. So that piece is something I really, really love with Frank Zappa. It was my first introduction. This was my introduction to Frank Zappa at all, the Uncle Meat album. And it's a tricky album because it's full of weird instrumentals, but the one that grabbed me was King Kong. Shall we do three at once, or shall we go around the horn? Or?
No, do all three at once. There's too many of us to go around the horn.
Do all three then. I go with an album which I think is very interesting, and that is Evening Star by Frippinino, and especially the piece, which I think is one of the most haunting pieces there is, called Index Metals. This is I would say this is the most, it's a scary piece. I wouldn't play it with the lights out. Absolutely. Because it's really, really haunting. It's really sort of, it's a really jarring piece. And it goes on for 12 or 15 minutes or something like that. I really enjoy it. It's once you get into things like that, it grows on you. It really does. And I'd like to finish off with something else. This is Fatal Convention from the album Full House. And it has an instrumental jig, or a few jigs, I guess, that they actually put together and call it Dirty Linen. And this is sort of fusion folk played by an English folk group way back in 1970. This is really, really, it really grooves. It really grooves, and it really sort of has this British sort of an Irish sort of the tune goes into different angles and stuff like that. It's very busy, as a matter of fact. It's very busy. So, and that is a classic lineup with Richard Thompson in it. So it's very good. So that's my three picks.
Okay, fantastic.
I have a boatload of honorable mentions.
Well, hopefully we'll have time to get in some honorable mentions. Already starting off with things I can add to the list of things to check out. Thank you, Pontus. Let's go over to Philippe Edward. Philippe, tell us about your favorite instrumental pieces, please.
Cool. All right. This was really challenging because, like, initially my mind went to, some of my favorite groups who are not instrumental artists, not instrumental bands, and then gradually I started to realize, like, you have your Jeff Becks and all the blues guitarists and all the big sort of guitar heroes, and then I just started to realize that this is basically a can of worms, right? The list can go on endlessly. So I had to really, really focus until like right now, literally, I've been like just reshuffling my selection here with all the props I've got. So first one I'll go with, since I mentioned guitar heroes, is one of my top 5 guitar heroes. Sometimes he's my number 1, on other days he's not. That's Joe Satriani right here with his album Time Machine. And I thought of the opening track, the eponymous one, Time Machine, very characteristic of the early Joe Satriani sound. This guy, he's a guitar hero. He's known for his own signature sound. But here, like always, he never does over the top shredding and just, noisy soloing. He really focuses on melody and on using the guitar really as a voice. And he does that excellently on this tune, which is also pretty much a deep track, I think. So, and this is an album that really stayed with me a lot when I was like, teenager in my formative years as a fan of music and a guitar player myself. Then at some point it occurred to me that, one of my top 5 bands and one of the top 5 of most people, I think here, that is Rush. Rush have quite a few instrumental tracks. Some of them are, the usual suspects. They appear on most lists, YYZ, La Villa Strangiato. So I thought, wait, I'll maybe leave those for others. I'll stray away from them since they are some of the most obvious and most celebrated instrumental prog metal tracks. So I went with the track Leave That Thing Alone from Counterparts, right here. Absolutely love, of course. I love every era of Rush. Usually we gravitate towards the 70s period, obviously, with Hemispheres and all that. But I think this is a great example of their 90s sound, a very pivotal moment in their career. Great sound, great tracks, and as far as this instrumental goes, it's again very, very succinct, very economical, and I absolutely adore the sound of Alex Lifeson's guitar guitar sound. Excuse me. Very spacey, very lush, very melodic. Again, classic Lifeson. Anyway, great instrumental track here on Counterparts. Not as flashy and proggy as YYZ and those sort of late 70s, early 80s tracks, but absolutely a standout. And this one here is maybe another sort of unusual choice, as I'm a huge Dream Theater fan, generally big prog fan, and Dream Theater was the band that kind of got me really into prog, everything prog, rock, metal, etc. And then at some point in their career, they formed an instrumental band called Liquid Tension Experiment, with until now 3 albums featuring 3 members of Dream Theater and Tony Levin on the bass. And I went for the second album, which is from 1999. Here we go. Liquid Tension Experiment number 2. And the track that I always gravitated towards from this album was the one called By Accident. It's written B-I accident, one word. And it's really the closest thing that you would hear from any members of Dream Theater, the closest thing to fusion. It has especially one little section in it, which is very jazzy, very fusiony, very close to Santana as well. Really freewheeling. Absolutely love it. So those are my 3 choices, and we'll see later. I got some also kind of unusual honorable mentions.
Okay. Not surprising to see any of those three on somebody's list. We may see some Joe Satriani appearing later.
Cool.
We'll see how that works out. All right, so thank you very much for that, Philippe. Let's go over to Mr. Clauser.
1986. Flotsam and Jetsam with the song Flotzilla at the end of the CD. Again, this was our introduction to Jason Newsted, and this song just is a blistering thrash epic to end the album. It's just mind blowing how the guitar players Ed Carlson and Mike Gilbert just all in sync with each other. It's just a fantastic track. One I played so much as a teenager rather, and just love the track. Always have. The next one, I've had the privilege of seeing this guy do this live a couple times, and he's a student of Joe Satriani. Steve Vai is going to come up here for the love of God. Mm. I mean, that's just, it's a shredding song, but I defy you to find me a shredder who can still make this musical vomit, as some people call it, still have some amazing feel to it and emotion. And that song has it, as far as I was concerned. It's the centerpiece of this album, and always has been one of my favorites to listen to. It was a joy to watch Steve play this live a couple of times. Absolutely one of my favorites. And then, just to kind of throw things off just a little bit, let's go back to the 70s. Alan Parsons from the Tales of Mystery Imagination, the Fall of the House of Usher piece, about a 15-minute piece of music co-written with Andrew Powell, conducting an orchestra, and then they kind of intersperse it with some stuff by the band. You get all these kind of weird sound effects and all kinds of creepy little elements in there. Something that I have loved for 40 plus years since my sister got this album, and it's still a favorite of mine to this day. So the Fall of the House of Usher suite from the Alan Parsons Project.
Very nice. Three very different selections there.
Sorry, when John mentioned just there, a student of Joe Satriani, for a second I got scared he was going to mention Kirk Hammett.
No. It was a Funko.
The Call of Cthulhu.
I would have gone with Orion myself, but
yeah. All right. Who did I say was next? Rich. Rich, you are going to be next. Tell us about your three favorite instrumental pieces, please.
Well, I did have three figured out, and then heard a song this weekend, and I realized that had to be in my top three. But my number three choice is probably an obvious choice, but I'm going to do La Via Strangiato by Rush. I think that was, I think side two of Hemispheres was probably Rush at their best. I don't think they ever got any better than that. And that song is it's so adventurous, and there's just so many cool things going on in it. And I love it especially love that part Monsters, which I didn't realize for a long time was actually, they got it from an old cartoon or something. But anyhow, I think that was really them at their best. And my number two choice, I'm going to go with Bore by Jethro Tull from Stand Up, which my all-time favorite album cover. I just love that cover. And I think Bore is great. It's kind of jazzy for Jethro Tull. They didn't get jazzy very much. The flute playing, and Ian Anderson talking into his flute is fantastic. And it also has a really cool bass solo. By Glenn Cornick. And I think it's a great song. And my number one choice is Fracture by King Crimson. I'm more of a fan of the first four King Crimson albums, but Fracture to me is my all-time favorite King Crimson song. I like that the first 6 or 7 minutes, it's all kind of teasing a little bit. It gets loud, then it gets soft again. And then finally the last 3 or 4 minutes, they just put it into high gear, and it is just incredible. And I love the violin playing on it. The violin, David Cross gets some of the most evil sounds out of his violin It's like, it sounds like he's playing it through a wah-wah pedal at times. It's just, I just think it's a fantastic song. And like I said, the last 3 or 4 minutes, it's worth sitting through that whole album to get to those last 3 or 4 minutes when all the band just play together and they kick it into high gear. So, yep, that's my number one choice.
Okay.
That would have absolutely made my list as well.
Cool.
Can't go wrong with some King Crimson. Thank you very much, Rich. All right, Tim, what have you got for us tonight?
John had the pleasure of seeing Steve Vai less than 2 weeks ago, and it was mind-blowing. So I had it in my head that we were doing 5, and then I thought, well, maybe we're doing honorable mentions, so I did 10. So I'll pick 3 of those. I've also got a cold. There's nothing better than getting a cold in the middle of summer, but anyway.
Yeah.
Nobody wants a man cold. So my first one is Switch 625 from Def Leppard, High and Dry. Follows immediately out of Bringing on the Heartbreak, and I hate it when, I like hearing Bringing on the Heartbreak on the radio because you don't often hear pre-Pyromania, but I'm also disappointed because I expected to go into Switch 625. Always been one of my favorite instrumentals. It's dynamic. I've learned later from doing some digging into bands that influenced them, that riff is very reminiscent of, I can't think of the name of the song, but it's a song on Thin Lizzy's Fighting. I can't remember which song it is, but it's like, oh, that's where they got Switch 625 from. But anyway, that's my first one. Second one is from an album that a few of us participated in a Dark Horse panel on. I know Pontus and Reed were there, but from this album, Europe Wings of Tomorrow, I went with Aphasia, which is, it's not a particularly long instrumental, but it's always been a favorite of mine. It's very Euro sounding, very melodic, great John Norum guitar playing, not necessarily shredding, just very, very melodic. There are some fast parts. That's a lesser known one I'd like people to check out. It's, actually this whole album is lesser known and deserves another look, but Aphasia, last song on side 1 of this album. And another album by a fairly well-known group, matter of fact, a time period that I'm always trumpeting to people. We're going back to 1975 from the debut Journey album. And the song I'm picking is the last song on side 1 called Cahutek, which is a blistering instrumental. Ainsley Dunbar on the drums, killing it. Of course, very young Neil Sean playing, and also a fellow that just passed away about a month ago. They had another guitar player in the band originally, a guy named George Tickner, who just passed away July 6th, I believe. And he wrote a lot of these early songs, and they're not at all what you might expect from Journey. This is the pre-Steve Perry years. So it's got elements of fusion. It's got elements of hard rock. It's very melodic in places, and want to give it some love. So Cahutek from the debut Journey album.
Yeah, I also really like Nickel and Dime from.
It was a toss-up. I think that Rush were listening when Nickel and Dime came out.
Yeah, I didn't understand. Yeah, a little bit of Tom Sawyer.
Yeah,
or maybe Journey was listening to Rush, because I hear a little bit of Xanadu in that.
Yeah, they both came out in 77, so I'm not sure who influenced what. But but Nickel and Dime was almost there. But I just love Cahutek to death.
Cool.
Very good. The pre-Joe Perry years, or Steve Perry. Sorry, not Joe Perry. I get my Perrys mixed up.
Yeah, different Steves too.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Tim. All right, so this, interestingly, I'm of an age that when I was listening to music in the 80s, of course, the shrapnel shredders were a big thing. Big instrumental albums were just starting to be cool in the heavy metal community. I mean, they'd been around in Prague for a while, but heavy metal was really just starting to get into them. But lately, I rarely, if ever, listen to strictly instrumental music, unless it's jazz. And I wanted to stick within a hard rock and metal context. And just thinking about that, 3 tracks, 4, because I'm cheating on one, instantly came to mind. The first one is from 1976, one of what I consider to be the perfect rock albums ever recorded, off a little number called Boston.
Hmm.
Now, on the album, it's listed as a foreplay/long time, so you could consider it one song, but actually, I think Foreplay stands on its own as a composition. Now, it's not quite 2 minutes long, so it's pretty short, and yet it packs everything you could ever want in an instrumental composition into 2 minutes. It's dynamic in the literal sense. It has soft passages, it has loud passages, it has fast passages and slow passages. Wonderful use of keyboard sounds. I don't know what kind of keyboard he was playing, mixed in with heavy guitar. It is bombastic. It feels like, Night at Bald Mountain or something like that. They used to love playing this song. I say this all the time, but when I was a kid, roller skating rinks was where we heard hard rock, right? And they used to love to play this song and just crank it up at the last notes. And then you go into Long Time. It's the perfect transition. And it's one of those instrumental pieces that I never get tired of listening to. And I think even if Long Time wasn't coming up, and that is one of my favorite Boston songs, perhaps my favorite on the album, just that 2 minutes of instrumental is worth listening to by itself. We're going to go from the 70s into the 80s. And this artist, I know a lot of people talk about the effect that Eddie Van Halen had on them the first time that they heard Eruption. And I'm going to say I'm not a huge fan of Eruption because it sounds exactly like what it is. It's a guy warming up his guitar techniques. It's not a song. Well, this was my Eddie Van Halen, a man named Yngwie Malmsteen. The first time I heard Yngwie Malmsteen, my jaw hit the floor. I was like, who is this guy and how does he do what he is doing? And this first album, Rising Force, the very first track, Black Star, is possibly Yngwie's best composition. And if not his best composition, it is Yngwie Malmsteen in a nutshell. It sounds like a Baroque song re-recorded in the modern era. But, I mean, Yngwie, if there is a guitarist who gets more crap than Yngwie Malmsteen, I am unaware of him. Maybe C.C. DeVille from Poison or something. But people make fun of Yngwie all the time, but he is an astounding guitarist. His technique is amazing, but he also has incredible melody. He has a feel for the music that he creates. And on Black Star, he has restraint, which is something that as his ego grew, he would kind of lose going through the 80s. But there are slow melodic passages interspersed with this mind-bending technique. And it's just an amazing song. It's the kind of thing that when it hit, everybody that I knew, now this is a small town in Montana, so I didn't know a lot of guitar players, but all three of us that thought about being guitar players were like, wow, this guy is really incredible. He instantly set the bar for guitar players the way that Eddie did, even though this is just a few years later. After that, every guitar player was sweet picking and trying to be like Yngwie. And even now in 2023, if you're talking about a really warp speed guitar player, they compare him or her to Yngwie Malmsteen. That's like the benchmark. So, but if you only are ever going to listen to one Yngwie Malmsteen song, if you've never listened to Yngwie, which is quite possible in 2023, Black Star off of Rising, give that one a listen. For my third and a half track, I'm advancing to the year 2008, and one of my absolute favorite finds as an instrumentalist, and that's a little guitar player named John Lowry, otherwise known as John 5. And I'm going to take two songs off of this particular album. There's my signed copy of Requiem. So I was not a Marilyn Manson fan. I like Rob Zombie well enough, but I've never been particularly impressed by his music. I saw him live with John 5 twice, and I was not impressed either time. So I don't know what made me pick up my first John 5 album. It was an album called Songs for Sanity. I literally just was walking down the music aisle and went, well, that looks interesting. I'm going to pick it up. Talk about an impulse buy. Took it home, listened to it, and went, where has this guy been my whole life? And why doesn't he play like this when he's playing for other people? My feeling on John 5 is when he joins other groups, he cuts off 98% of his talent because they don't need it. When he's doing his own music, he's amazing. And again, it's not just because he has mind-bending technique. In the year 2023, technique is no longer impressive. There are too many guitar players that have too good of technique for technique to be a selling point on its own. You have to do something with it. And he does these incredible songs where they sound like the soundtracks to horror movies, over which he is doing these incredibly complicated tapping licks. And then he sometimes does country music on top of that. And the song that I'm picking, so all of the songs, by the way, on this album are named after torture instruments from medieval times. There's a fun fact for you. So he has a song called The Heretic's Fork, which actually is a beautiful, straight up heavy metal blaster. It's got this great riff. And one thing I don't like about instrumental songs is when they are just too much flashy stuff. This song has a structure. It's got a riff, a repeated riff. So it's like riff, solo, riff, solo. It gives you something to attach to as you're listening to it. Fantastic playing. It's a great piece. Towards the end of it, it winds down and transitions into the next song called The Noisemaker's Fife. Yeah, for some reason, the internet thinks it's fire. It's fife. And this actually opens with a finger-picked country song. And it slows down and he's just doing these country etudes. Now in the background, it sounds like horror movie music again. There's like this synthesizer making these kind of screaming noises. So it's this utter weird, disquieting contrast. And it sounds like Chet Atkins. And then he goes do 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 da 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 da, and he slams back into the riff from The Heretic's Fork. And for the remainder of the song, it's crushing heavy metal again. And it's one of the best transition pieces of a guy showing you everything he does and having it sound great. And if you've never explored John 5's solo music, all of his solo albums are just amazing. Although I will say if you get 3 or 4 of them, you'll probably start to think, well, these sound kind of similar. But for the first 3 or 4 albums of his you listen to, they're all just killer stuff. But check out those 2 songs, listen to them back to back, because just one or the other doesn't give you the full picture. He did this thing, I saw him live. He does this number where he plays, I think he starts off on a mandolin, and then he goes to a banjo, and then he plays a guitar. He can play anything with frets. It's just absolutely crazy, the level of talent the man has. And let me tell you, Motley Crue is using like 1% of the man's abilities, but this tour probably paid him much as all of those solo albums combined. So I don't begrudge anybody in the music industry making a living however they have to pay those bills. All right, we have lots of time left. We've blew through that. I may have been a little restrictive on people at the beginning. I'm sorry about that. So let's go around the horn again and talk about honorable mentions. Panis, you said you've got a pile of honorable mentions.
Yeah.
What would you like to mention honorably?
I start with this one. This is Mike Oldfield. This is the here's the back. Here's the back is actually the original cover. It's Incantations, one of my favorite Mike Oldfield albums, because it's very sort of has this sort of minimalistic form to it, and there's lots of percussion by Pierre Moulin. It's released in 1979. I recommend you listen to the album as a whole, but I strongly recommend Incantations number 4, because there you get all the percussions and stuff like that. And there's also number 3, which is a more rocky sort of thing. There is vocals on certain parts of the album, but you know, this is just a beautiful piece of music. It was a double album when it was released. I'm going to go with the strange one because I'm always the one who mentions Beatles, so I'll do it today as well. Because I want to flip this over. This is the soundtrack to the Jet of the Submarine. It's not the most loved Beatles albums because it only has 6 Beatles songs on it. Side 2 is instrumental music from the film, written by George Martin. Not a Beatle in sight. But if you listen to it, it's quite interesting. Especially the 3 songs that sort of forms a suite called Sea of Time, Sea of Holes, and Sea of, what does it say? Sea of Monsters, yes. This is sort of made in 1968, so it was like very sort of backwards things going, and lots of, it's done to the movie. He's written it for the movie, but it's really cool. It goes places where you wouldn't expect it. It starts with an Indian sort of feel to it, and ends up with playing Bach in the end. So those 3 tracks are well worth listening to. If you never have flipped that record over just because you wanted It's All Too Much, just do it, because it will absolutely blow your mind. And I will end with this one. What an instrumental group. Booker T and the MGs. You can't go wrong with anything on this. What to choose? There's Bootleg, there's Green Onions. There is this piece I love a lot called Red Beans and Rice, which has one of the heaviest riffs in 65. It just grooves. It just and if you want to go into Stax and find out what it was all about, this was the core members of the band who made all those Otis Redding recordings and stuff like that. And their instrumental work is just killer. Steve Cropper and Booker T. Jones and stuff like that. It just blows. Highly recommend it.
Right.
And so that's what I had.
Okay. Donald Duck Dunn on bass. Yeah, Booker T and the MGs there.
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
and Al Jackson on drums.
Right. And if you don't listen to the Yellow Submarine soundtrack, the Blue Meanies will come and steal your music. None of us want that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Juanes.
Yeah.
All right, Philippe.
Yeah.
Have you got honorable mentions for us?
I've got a few indeed that were left behind. Okay, so of course the band that got me and probably another billion people into heavy metal, Iron Maiden. When I started listening to the album Iron Maiden, of course, there was that instrumental track, Transylvania. Maiden don't really have that many instrumental tracks, but this one really stood out for me when I was really young then because of it's a great example of a heavy metal instrumental tune that has great lead guitar in it, great riffs, great melodies, blistering solos, but it all really comes together really nicely, and it feels like Maiden doing a really cohesive instrumental track that's not just a collection of riffs, solos, and a melody here or there. Really great tune. I cannot imagine it with lyrics, so it's really like one of those great early heavy metal instrumental tracks. Perfect if you're learning the guitar and you want something to learn how to play solid lead guitar, rhythm guitar as well, and you want track play over. Coming back to progressive, I'm a big prog fan, and I had to go through so many bands who, of course, have so many instrumental tracks. And this time I decided I'd go after Rush with Camel and the Snow Goose, which is basically it's music inspired by the Snow Goose. The whole thing is instrumental. It could be considered as one full track, if you like, a bit like Dark Side of the Moon in a way, although that's not instrumental. But anyway, I digress. The tune I thought of is Ryader Goes to Town, which is really great. It has, as you said earlier about, I think, Boston Reed, it's very dynamic. It has emotional bits, very bluesy, slow, quiet bits, and then much faster ones with a riff that's actually maybe Rush listen to it, because there's a bit there that's reminiscent of La Villa Strangiato. And Andrew Latimer is one of the all-time criminally underrated guitarists of the era, and regardless of genre. Great tone, very emotional, very emotional player, great feeling in his melodies and solos, very economical. And lastly, I cannot go without mentioning my number one guitar hero, at least when, again, I was starting to learn the guitar, and I was just basically learning blues like most of us were learning on the guitar, and that's Stevie Ray Vaughan. I have here his one of his best of collections, and I was just blown away after hearing one typical 12-bar blues after another, and suddenly I hear this thing called Riviera Paradise, which is like this very dark, mellow, jazzy tune with indeed many jazz chords, very unusual choices for Stevie Ray, who was like, more or less a sort of like, 12-bar blues player, very electric, of course, and intense player, unlike anyone else. But this tune was like nothing I had ever heard from him before. And it has a very lasting impression on me. So yeah, I think those are my honorable mentions.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Now I've got who did Chitlin's Con Carne? I know Stevie Ray Vaughan was a Kenny Burrell. Yeah, Kenny Burrell was the original artist. Stevie Ray Vaughan was a huge Kenny Burrell fan, as was Peter Frampton. So I did not think of putting any Stevie on my list. So glad to see him make an appearance. John Clauser, honorable mention, sir.
Well, glad to see Mike Oldfield getting some love. He's certainly a lot more than Tubular Bells. So I was even going to mention Tubular Bells, but Al Di Meola, Race with Devil on Spanish Highway, that is just a blistering song. Just a mix of jazz and rock and just a bunch of different flavors that Al would bring into the music on the Elegant Gypsy album. Just a wonderful album. Go back to a little bit of thrashy speed stuff with Wrathchild America from the Climbing the Walls album, a song called Hernia. Just this pounding double bass kick from Shannon Larkin throughout the whole song. And it's just I usually do a lot of it on my steering wheel. But a great track nonetheless from a very underrated band that should have gotten more notice than they did. Another thrashy band from the Boston area called Malaya Rage from the Kill to Survive album, a song called Malaya Rage. Very good thrashy track. I got to give a little love to the man on Joe's shirt. I love Homebound from Cat Scratch Fever. I absolutely love that. I've always love hearing Homebound, and I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention Los Endos from the Trick of the Tail album off Genesis.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John. Boy, I haven't even heard the words Malaya Rage since the 80s. That is a blast from the past. Not sure I could pick him out of a lineup, but I do remember the name. Okay, let's go down to Rich. Rich, do you have any honorable mentions for us?
Yeah, I have about 3 or 4. One that almost made my top 3, and then when I thought of King Crimson Fracture, it kind of kicked it out. But I'm going to go with Vangelis, Spiral, the title track from his 77 album. That was kind of my introduction to electronic music in the early 80s. Actually, my high school English teacher got me into Vangelis, and that was my first exposure to electronic music. And I think that song is really fantastic. It starts out kind of simple, then it kind of builds as it goes along. Vangelis plays all the instruments on it. And at one point, like drums come in, and it's just a very dynamic song. And it's a great electronic, great electronic tune. Another one I'm going to mention, Mogwai, Hunted by a Freak, from their album Happy Songs for Happy People. I remember I heard this album at a cafe. I heard it being played. I was like, "What is this?" And the guy told me, and I went out and immediately bought the album. And I love this song, "Hunted by a Freak." It's actually probably my favorite song of theirs. I was kind of disappointed when I found out the rest of their albums kind of sounded like happy songs for happy people. But "Hunted by a Freak," I just think is an incredible song. The music, the way the music swells and it builds, it's terrific. I'm really into electronic ambient music, so I have to do "Tangerine Dream," Rubicon Part 1. And it's tough to say why I like it so much. I just think it's just, when I think of that song, I think of the cover, and I have a thing about "Tangerine Dream." Even their album covers put me to sleep. And I think that song goes along really well with the cover. And one more little mention, I'm going to do "Horizons" by Genesis. I'm a real big fan of the acoustic side of Genesis. And I'm actually not that fond of the album Foxtrot, but I love the song "Horizons." I think that's a terrific song. So those are my honorable mentions.
Hey, thank you very much. I was going to call "Tangerine Dream" music to sleep to, but I thought that was cruel. But you brought it up, so yes, they are. Not that they're bad. They just they're going to put you to sleep.
Was it the movie Thief that Tangerine Dream did the soundtrack for?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing stuff.
Yeah, I have a radio show called Night Toast, and in the second hour, I play electronic ambient music. I play a lot of "Tangerine Dream." So, yeah.
And then have to drive home. Okay, Tim, you have, by my count, 7 honorable mentions?
I'm going to talk about just 3 real quick because they've already been mentioned. La Villa Strangado, of course. I mean, I love the fact that they incorporate Raymond Scott's Powerhouse. You can watch, some of the classic Warner Brothers cartoons, and you'll hear the melody. Like, and they just incorporated into that. I mean, it's so epic. I also had Boston Foreplay on my list. I think it's a song unto itself. I mean, they could have easily split it on the CD. Funny story about that song is that back in the early 90s, when I was really starting to dig back and get into some of the 70s groups, because I'm, kind of an 80s kid, there was a radio station that would always play that. The Foreplay piece must be like to kick off the weekend. So it would be, the last thing they'd play before 6 o'clock. I always thought it was Deep Purple before I started to learn a little bit more with all the organ. I thought, well, that must be Deep Purple. Love it, though. And the other one that was already mentioned very briefly was Orion from Master of Puppets. And I cannot believe that with 2 orchestral albums, to their credit, Metallica they didn't put Orion on either of them. I think that's a huge oversight, because I think that would have lent itself very, very well. So I want to get into some that have never been mentioned. One of my favorite kind of unsung artists that, people know basically for one song, Aldo Nova. This is his second album, Subject, and the beginning of it, it's kind of like 3 songs in one, but there's Subject's theme, Armageddon, and then race cars in brackets, and then just Armageddon. But it's just a cool instrumental, basically, all in one thing. Always been a fan of that. Let me see, what else do I have here? Oh, yeah, some classic 80s guitar shredding hair metal. Mr. Scary from Doc and Back to the Attack. George Lynch, shredding up the storm. But it's not just that. It's a great song in its own right. Mick Brown and the double bass drums, and there's a song like somebody mentioned. There's a song there. There's actually a song. It's not just guitar shredding for the sake of it. One that no one ever talks about is 38 Special. This is the third album, Rockin' Into the Night. There's an instrumental on here called Robin Hood, which is kind of what it sounds like. Some on the guitar is like it kind of sounds like a horn, but it's just this really cool kind of shuffle of an instrumental piece. It's kind of southern twangy sounding. Obviously, they were still pretty southern rock at this point. I've always liked it, and I stayed away from Vai and Satriani because I thought, well, that's most of what they do is instrumental music. But I do want to shed some light on a Satch tune, because I'm a relatively new fan of Joe Satriani, but just kind of getting into his albums. I don't have them all yet, but one song that I absolutely love is from his Shockwave Supernova album from 2015, and it's called On I'm probably not saying it right, Perigene Wings. It is heavy. It is, you feel like you want to dance to it. It's so cool. So those are my honorable mentions.
Okay, very good. So, interestingly, I also was going to talk about Mr. Scary. For years and years, I was a George Lynch completist until the man started putting out 2, 3, sometimes 4 projects a year. And I finally went, you know what, screw it. Not all of it is great. The year he starts putting out every project is wonderful. I'll pick up everything he does again. But for now, I probably have 15 albums that he plays on. And he plays at the Dallas Guitar Show almost every year. So I have seen him live 15 or 16 times. And he plays Mr. Scary every time. And he's been, unfortunately, attempting to record something just as good since 1986 and absolutely failing. That song will be his glorious burden for the rest of his life. I am a huge Satriani fan. Satch is probably the most melodic of all of the Shrapnel. Now, he was never on Shrapnel. He had a major label deal. Very unusual at that time. But of that style of music, he's my favorite because he does instrumentals that sound like all you have to do is add lyrics and you've got a song. And Flying in a Blue Dream is my favorite Satriani piece. It is the most melodic. It's the most haunting. This great Lydian progression. It's just beautiful. And then I thought I would mention a really fun one. So it's actually this entire album from Mr. Paul Gilbert, talk about the Shrapnel Shredders. My signed copy there of Behold Electric Guitar. And I don't know exactly when Paul started doing this, but he had this concept that every song on the album was written with lyrics. And because he does not like the sound of his own voice, he then took off the lyrics and replaced it all with him playing slide guitar where the lyrics would go. So they're all instrumental, but with literally lyrical passages of slide guitar. And it works remarkably well. Plus his lyrics are really funny. When I saw him in concert, he was talking about what the lyrics were. Like, for instance, there's this song on here called I Have a Building, or I Own a Building. And he was talking about touring this guy's building when they were shooting a video for Mr. Big. And the guy was like, hey, you need to see the generator room, and hey, you need to see the roof. And he was thinking, man, this guy really loves his building. So the lyrics are like, I own a building, and isn't it really great to own a building? You know, you can see maybe why he didn't record the actual lyrics. But that approach of taking the lyrics and replacing them with instrumental parts really turned out to be a great idea. And I don't know if anybody else does that. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, check out Behold Electric Guitar, the whole album. And I think he does that kind of constantly now on his new compositions. But that's the first album that I remember him doing that.
He just put out a Dio album where he does a bunch of like Dio and Sabbath and Rainbow, and it's exactly right. I listened to a couple of tracks from him. I don't know how he does it. He finds a way to mimic the vocals with the guitar. And he said that, you know, by trying to play the melody, it gets you to play things that you wouldn't normally play, because singing kind of breaks down invisible barriers to go from one note to the next. I've seen him do it with, there's a great clip of him doing one of my favorite unsung bands, Burning Heart by Vandenberg. He plays that all melody, most of the innards of the song, but the melody. I've seen him do it with Owner of a Lonely Heart. Like, yeah, it's really, really ingenious. And he's just such a fun guy. He's so self-effacing, and I get a kick out of his interviews. But yeah, he's really, really smart for even thinking of doing that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful approach if you've got the chops to pull it off. Lord knows I do not. Okay, so that's about an hour of us discussing our favorite instrumental music. We have covered a lot of territory, as always. Going to be leaving this chat with some things to check out. And by the way, if you're interested in Mike Oldfield, there is on Tubi.com or Tubi.com, there's a documentary series called All You Need Is Love, which is actually a documentary series about pop music from 1976. They do an entire episode on Mike Oldfield. Really a fascinating character, as it turns out. That's neither here nor there. Thank you very much for watching the show. We appreciate you checking us out. Feel free to check out the Patreon. It's a great group, and we'd love to have you. The Contrarian sells t-shirts and all the usual stuff, and we will see you very soon on another show. Panelists, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Great seeing everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Good to see you.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.